But we have our panelists here. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. It's been an amazing day, and we are headed into another showstopper session afterwards, and then some more networking. But I thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like we've been on a journey all day, right? We've been talking about so many wonderful, critical, powerful topics. We were just in the workplace. Now we are going back into the classroom, if you will. Although we know our classrooms are not really just for walls, right? They have now expanded virtually, outdoors, indoors, kind of all different locations. So we have a wonderful group of very passionate folks here that we've talked a lot about neurodiversity in the classroom, and really we're thinking of that in, globally, kind of all over, and how we can really and truly value all of our students and children inside and outside of the classroom. So I would like them all to go ahead and introduce themselves. Here we go, Dr. Katheryn.
Hi, I'm Katheryn Whittaker. I live in the Cayman Islands currently, originally from California, but I teach at the University of the College of the Cayman Islands. So I work more with neurodiversity and populations that are in the upper grades, outside of some of the grade 12, grade 13, and then higher in the university sector. I also work for a private organization called Aspire Limited, and it's I do neurofeedback training. That's where we do brain training on anywhere from neurodiversity to trauma to focus and concentration and peak performance. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I know it's been a long day, so thank you all for staying. My name is Ashley Campbell. I am the Director of Learning Design and Delivery for an organization called Digital Promise. It is a minority-led nonprofit that works actively to close the digital divide. And I work specifically with Verizon Innovative Learning Schools. I am originally from Inglewood, California. And if you want to know more about me, thank that woman over there, my mother, Jacqueline Redeemer. I will always shout her out no matter where I am. She is always my plus one, but we're talking about neurodiversity on this panel, and I grew up in a neurodiverse family. You guys will hear that thrown around a lot, so I just want to name that neurodiversity is just the way the brain operates. No brains operate the same, so there is neurotypical behavior, and then those that get a little bit more creative. So as you hear us throw around the name neurodiversity in the spirit of equity of voice, so that you all know what we're talking about, just in case, that is what we will be referencing. So I am happy to be here with you all, and I will pass it to my colleague.
Hi, my name is Missy Owen, and I'm the Executive Clinical Director with Puzzlebox Academy. We are a school located in Florida, and our population is very neurodiverse. Our kiddos may have an autism diagnosis, ADHD, ODD, PDA, like all the acronyms, basically. And I'm a BCBA as well, which is a board certified behavior analyst. So I provide ABA therapy to our kiddos, and that's applied behavior analysis. Just more acronyms getting thrown out there. I'm originally from upstate New York and currently live down in Florida. Definitely autism is going to be what I focus on with the neurodiversity, because that's the main population I do work with. And just really, how can we get these kiddos into the classroom but not make them fit into the classroom? How can we make the classroom fit better for our kiddos?
My name is Dr. Louise Debreczeny, and I'm the owner of the Institute of Neurosemantic and Sociocognitive Learning, or INSL for short. And I came to how's that? Yes. So anyway, I came to start this business after many years of working with special needs students. And I started out my career as a classical musician, and then I worked in a trade as a landscape contractor for many years. And my final job in that trade was managing a little nursery. And we were having special needs students in the 19 to 21-year-old transition program coming to the nursery to work, and I really resonated with working with that group of students. So at that point, I switched over and went back to school and got a master's in teaching, and then I got a special education endorsement, and I started teaching public school and found that the strategies we were using with our special ed students were not making any difference to them. They were year after year still not reading, year after year still not able to calculate, year after year still not socially, emotionally able to connect with the other students. So I started looking around for something different than the model that we'd been using in public schools, and I found the Neurosemantic language learning theory by Dr. Ellen Arwood, and that was a transformational learning experience for me, and I went back to school and got my doctorate in neuroeducation from the University of Portland and studied with her because I could see that her ideas actually could and did make a difference for special needs students. So now I have my own business, and we see children and adults with learning differences, and that's everything from that second grader who is just not catching on to reading to that 24-year-old who has autism and is living at home with mom and dad and still not doing their own laundry. So I work with a wide variety of students, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about some of the ideas that I've been using and that my colleague Mary Jane and I use, and so I'll hopefully get a chance to get into that in a little bit. Thank you.
And again, my name is Dr. Mary Riordan-Karlsson, and I have been an educator for 35 plus a few years. I started my education career as a teacher in the South Bronx, New York. I started with the real little ones, the kindergartners, and I've pretty much taught every level, every grade level, all the way up through, as I say, the big kids now, the college kids. I am on faculty at Arizona State University. I teach in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College there. I started my career, as I said, in the South Bronx, and we didn't have a whole lot of technology there. We had a lot of other tools and toys and other, puzzles and such. And then when I moved out to Silicon Valley, I wound up in the heart of technology, right? And I was at a model Apple technology school. So that's where I really learned a lot of how we integrate the technology into our classrooms to address many of these issues that we have talked about in different ways. And so currently I am with McGraw Hill. I'm a professional learning services director, and we of course have a lot of textbooks, but we also have a lot of digital products. I'm in the digital product group that address a lot of these issues that we will be talking about today, that we have been talking about all day actually. In the classroom. I also, when we're talking a little about neurodiversity, my master's is in reading from the University of California at Berkeley, and I focus a lot on the neuroscience of reading and learning to read and write and sing and dance and play. And then I pursued my doctorate also at the University of California at Berkeley and for language literacy and culture. And so I was the technology coordinator for my pre-service teachers way back in the 90s when we were still using Hyper Studio and floppy disks and Reader Rabbit. Some of you might remember some of those. I know, right? So, and then more recently, I've been involved with a nonprofit that my children started. It's called Hug Your Head Foundation. My son is a TBI survivor, and so actually our whole family are survivors in many respects, but my children, my daughter is here today. She's a sibling of a TBI survivor, but so they started this foundation to help other TBI survivors and family members, right? And when we're thinking about, he's a student at ASU, and I teach a class at ASU called Understanding the Brain, so I'm also looking at it from a different perspective as a parent of a TBI survivor, and again, in the university level classrooms as well. A lot of neurodiversity that we address in those classrooms. So again, I welcome you here. We have a variety of perspectives And so we're just going to start out with a question. I know we've tapped into it a little bit, but maybe if we could delve into it a little bit more of really what does it mean to be neurodivergent, you know, in all of these different settings. So if you guys want to go ahead.
I can, yeah. So with that, it means that everyone's not the same, which sounds very simple. But I know, like specifically with our autistic kiddos, that the old school method was we want them to blend in. We want them to look exactly like everyone else. They will sit in their seat quietly, raise their hand when they want to be called on. But now, why? Why are we doing that? If it would help them attend better, to sit in their seat better, if every 5 seconds they just got to get a little flap out, why would we block them from doing that? So definitely that neurodivergent, we want to make sure that we are not promoting ableism, which ableism is the discrimination against persons with disabilities to make them appear like able-bodied persons. So with autistic population, stemming is going to be a big one. Those are those self-stimulatory behaviors that the kiddos engage in that may look a little odd to an outside stander, but for the kiddo, it helps them self-regulate. And if we want to make them fit in and look like everyone else, then yes, we would block that. We tell them, okay, put your hands, sit on your hands. But really, then that kiddo is so focused on, okay, just look like everyone else, be perfect, that they're not listening to the instruction. They miss that whole 30-minute math lesson that we just gave because they're trying to fit in. So instead of trying to make these kiddos fit in, we need to teach them ways to how can we adapt the environment to fit our kiddos. And maybe like, hey, if Johnny, you know, every 1 minute, just let him get up, jump 3 times, sit back down, put him on the aisle, put him to the side so he doesn't distract, let him do it, and now he can participate with the rest of the kiddos.
If I could expand upon that. So I come from a family where I had a brother who grew up neurodivergent. We didn't know how to help him, support him, anything of that nature. And my mom and I did a lot of research, advocacy work, and one thing I found, I was a junior in high school, and I found out that kids with ADD, ADHD, you can actually change the environment so that they get access to learning, access to do what they want to do, to where they feel a sense of belonging and included in the environment. And so it was at that age that I realized, hey, not everybody learns the same. And then you hear about learning styles and that being the end-all be-all. Everyone has a specific learning style. And now we've gotten to the point where that is being debunked because you might see that someone is a visual learner here and they might be, you know, auditory here. And so when you think about being neurodivergent, what that really talks about is just the way that the brain processes information. So if we take it a step back, because you might hear us reference special education quite a bit, and a question that pops up is everyone that has a disability neurodivergent? And that's not necessarily, the answer is not necessarily yes. So you can have ADHD or be autistic or have dyslexia, and it just means that the way your brain processes information is not in alignment with just the neurotypical way of processing information. And so because of that, you might need different entryways, different pathways. This is when we talk about access. This is when we talk about representation. This is when we talk about, you know, taking it outside of the classroom, making connections, and we'll get into culture, but making connections to the community around them. And okay, they're learning, let's say they're in economics class, but then they go, I remember I had my students go to a beauty supply store and actually start to price out, okay, you like this, like what's the difference? What justifies the difference in price for that? Why are you brand loyal to that? So starting to make those connections for what we were learning in the classroom to real world experiences. So they started to see themselves in the curriculum. So what does it mean to be neurodivergent? It just means you think outside of the box.
Want to add anything there, Dr. Katheryn? On that?
I think you all did an excellent job of explaining what it is. And I also think that it's confirmed with a lot of other testing and things like that as well. And I just remembered me as a leader in the university and also in my workplace. I'm a supervisor for clinicians, and I tend to be outside of the box in different areas of leadership as well. And it wasn't until I do a lot of neurofeedback, so I get neurofeedback on myself. And when I did a brain map, they talked about my brain being very different in the sense of I work out of kind of both sides of my brain and collaborate, and I tend to, I don't know if you've heard the saying, where, the difference between gender and men do it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and women are like 1, 5, 6, 8, and then they still get the same result. So that's kind of how when I'm working, I tend to be very artistic and creative, and also have to collaborate a lot, and have, not because I'm not confident in what I know, but I'd like to get the buy-in with everyone, because that's how I am. So it was very comforting to me knowing that the way I lead is not necessarily neurodivergent in the sense of a disability, but it actually helps me relax and know that it's okay. I can lead in this kind of a way. It was very much of a relief for me in that aspect.
And then, sorry, you got it.
Oh, I was just going to add to that when we think about how we learn through our experiences. So we have an experience, and that forms a neural pathway in our brain. And so even if you and I are sisters and we grow up in the same house, we have a different perspective because we're sitting 2, 3 feet apart. And so we'll have different neural pathways. So each family has a different set of values, and we learn that in our family. And every person grows up having a different set of neural pathways than everybody else, which is why neuroscience is such a tricky and interesting subject, because, for example, they have to have the patient awake if they're going to probe the brain, because my spot where I do my talking from is not the same spot that you do your talking from. So our brains literally are physically different because they're constructed by the experiences that we have. And the thing that really interests me is some people input meaning differently than other people. So if you input meaning in a way that is not typically addressed in school, then you're going to appear to not be able to learn. And if we bring in the way that you access meaning, then you can learn. So my big thing that really disturbs me about schools is that children who actually could be successful end up being in the special education system because we didn't give them what they needed. They weren't able to give us what we need. And I think that's something that we need to really turn around as educators. And I have a feeling that the people in this room, I'm preaching to the choir, but a lot of educators, if I give it to you and then I expect you to give it back to me in the way that I gave it to you, and if you give it back to me in the way that I gave it to you, then I know you learned it. And we know that's not really true. So anyway, I could go on, and Missy had something more she wanted to say.
Yeah, just one last little note. So with the neurodiversity as well, we want inclusion in the classroom. We want to get away from the old days that, we had the kiddos and kind of closed off to the ESE classroom. You maybe saw them for lunchtime, maybe PE, but besides that, they never got access to other kiddos. So the more we can include them in the classrooms, the better off they will be, because then they have those typical peer models, they can see those behaviors. Also, it teaches other kiddos to accept differences and to learn to kind of work around those distractions, that not everyone's the same, that you can give a different answer. You can hear the teacher teach the same lesson, but take it in 2 totally different directions, and that doesn't mean that either is wrong, it's just the different.
Absolutely. And we're all about providing opportunities, options for teachers, for parents, right, to learn more about not only this topic, but as we say, valuing those differences in the classroom, and outside of the classroom as well. And it's really important as we, the more we have these conversations, that we provide, again, these solutions and options and supports and everything. Because it is challenging, and I don't know if any of you remember being in the classroom when you step foot in the classroom, right? There's just a lot of things going on. Dorothy, I think, mentioned in the last session about chaos, right? And some classrooms you walk into, it doesn't matter if it's kindergarten or high school or college, it can seem a little chaotic because there is a lot going on. A lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of action and everything, right? And so for a lot of teachers, and I know in one of the earlier sessions we talked about, working with pre-service teachers, right? Teachers who are going to become teachers. this is a whole nother area for them to be addressing and to be learning about as they kind of embark on their careers. And so it's just amazing to hear all of these different perspectives and solutions, right? And supports and all of this to help, again, teachers and parents and the children, like we're saying, in the classroom and everything. Yeah. So how about, as we were talking, I know, Ashley, you mentioned, culture and kind of building, when we're talking about building a classroom culture and a sense of belonging, and how can we ensure that our special needs children or our neurodivergent children, right, are treated with dignity, right, and as part of the class and included in the class and in all of their different activities?
Well, I guess I could jump in since I was named, but I will say, without going into the different components of like resources, additional people, smaller classroom sizes, like the age-old things that I think we all have identified with, there are also different tools, guidelines to actually help the environment. So one tool that I used and referenced throughout professional learning for special education teachers was universal design for learning. So these are guidelines and principles around access, representation, and action and expression. So different ways where students can actually see where they show up and how they will access the information. And universal design for learning isn't just for students with disabilities. It is when you design your school, the scheduling system, the actual classroom with universal design for learning in mind, you actually design for all students. So you'll see, Missy talked about inclusive settings, you'll see in inclusion classrooms, you can use things like like choice boards, stations, you see peer-led groups, you see collaboration happening differently. And I know we're in a digital world and the collaboration, student voice looks very differently now. And so those different tools you can use to give the students access points to where they're still accessing the same information. They're still hitting the markers, but this barrier of just textbook learning, or this barrier of just writing an essay and turning it in, or just doing a test to tell me, and this is not a knock against any formative or summative assessments, I just want to put that out there, but they're given opportunities to engage with the material at multiple entry points. And so that is one tool. So I love giving actionable pieces. So if you haven't heard of Universal Design for Learning, please look it up.
Yeah, definitely. And I like too how you were talking about the choice boards, those visual schedules, getting those set up. And one way to promote dignity with the kiddos is teach about the different disorders that they may have. Hey, this is what autism is. This is what ADHD is. Don't shy away from it. Teach it so that way the kiddos can know, it can get some discussions going instead of just trying to brush it under the rug. It's like, oh, peace just different. It's fine. Move on. So I think that too is the more education we give the kiddos, the better off.
Can I also add one more thing? And so I know we talked about the kiddos, and professional development is my background, so I also want to talk about concretely how we can help educators and also school leaders. My organization, Digital Promise, has something called the Learner Variability Project, which shows different ways and different learner profiles of how people actually learn, how they show up in learning environments. And people often talk about this from the context of it just being students. And so now they've actually developed tools where teachers, paraprofessionals, dedicated aides, school admins can actually go in and see how they learn differently. Because I think a piece of it is that a lot of us might not know that we learn and process information in a different way because we've had to function and navigate in these educational systems that have only given us a certain finite amount of options. So when you take a step back and you have a resource and a tool, you might learn like, okay, I actually learned this specific way, or I align more with this profile. So that is another tool that you all can use, the Learner Variability Navigator. with the Learner Variability Project to see how you actually learn and process information, which might give you insight into your students.
That's so important. I was going to give an example of just challenging the I don't want to say regular learners, but the non-neurodivergent learners, because challenging them to learn a different way is important. And so as an educator myself at the college level, what I'll do is I will challenge all the kiddos. College kiddos too, I love it. They're very adulty. But I'll challenge them in ways that I push them out of their comfort zones in ways where, so the whole class is challenged and it's not just them. So I take it to another level. And then I get their buy-in and I have them make decisions, and then the whole class will buy in to what they want to do. And then it makes them feel that sense of community. And we talk about culture, that class culture. Then they all start to kind of come and develop. And then like if some of the neurodivergent kids or someone took a little bit longer time to come into some of the groups or some of the group processes, I might give them a better, more, something that's more maybe an incentive to have them help along, because then that will give them more of an incentive to challenge themselves to come into the classroom. So yes, I think that's a brilliant idea.
Well, I'd like to tag off of what you were saying about universal design for instruction. I think that's a really amazing way of viewing instructions. Tegan Wiggins, in case you aren't familiar with it, please check it out. And to segue from that to what I do, I've been working with thinking about the idea of the 8 psychological processes of literacy. And this guy Cooper wrote a textbook that everybody who's gone to teacher school has read about teaching literacy. And he talks about the 7 psychological processes of literacy, which are reading, writing, speaking, listening, thinking, calculating, and viewing. And I got to looking at those, and I'm like pairing them up, and I'm saying, oh, well, reading and writing go together because I write so you can read. And speaking and listening go together because I speak and then you can listen. And thinking and calculating, that's sort of an internal and an external process. And then we have viewing. Well, what's paired with viewing? Well, projecting. Well, how do we project? It occurred to me that we could draw for each other. So if I want to project what's in my mind so that you can view it, then I can draw it. And I don't mean art, because I'm not an artist. I just do stick figure drawing. But the drawing piece is transformational for certain students. For our students with autism, who are visual motor learners, drawing gives them that visual motor activity that allows their brain to recognize that a pattern even exists. Because for people with autism or for auditory processing disorders, for example, I can blah, blah, blah at those people all day long, and they don't hear it, not because they're deaf, but because they don't process or input meaning through the auditory system. So I can give them drawing and writing to do, and that does create meaning for them because of there's a lot of science behind this, but the hand and the eye obviously are very closely connected within the brain, and evolutionary scientists think that language and tool use of the hand are linked together in our evolutionary process. And so it makes sense that some of us use our hand to create mental images, whereas others of us listen to create mental images or view to create mental images. So if we add in that 8th missing process, psychological process of literacy, and allow our students to draw, then we can give them a tool that allows their brains to actually input meaning. So now we have a situation where we can draw and write, and reading is a natural outcome of that. In schools, typically we say, okay, everybody has to learn to read, that's decoding. And then when you've got that, then we're going to teach you how to write, which is encoding, and that's a lot harder than decoding. And we tell the kids that too, and they're like, oh yeah, it's really hard. And then if you're one of those smart kids that could do the reading and the writing, then you get to draw a picture. But your picture better look like the picture that the teacher put on the example, because that's the picture everybody is supposed to draw. That's backwards to my way of thinking. What seems to work best for my students, and I have students all through from autism to ADHD, all kinds of different, a variety of different types of neurodifferences. But what seems to pull it together for a lot of my students is first they draw, and that creates a mental picture for them. And then they write about what they drew. And the writing about what you drew is easier than just pulling it out of your head or out of the internal space because it's in front of you. Now the cognitive load is reduced. You've got this drawing in front of you, and you can label the ideas. So you can label who is doing what with whom and why they're doing it and how they're doing it and so forth. And then with those ideas, you can write a cogent sentence. And I've seen students who couldn't write anything before they drew, now all of a sudden can write a paragraph because they can see on the page what it is that they want to say. So my big message that I want to bring to this group today is that we have this 8th psychological process of learning, drawing, that we are not tapping into in education, but I believe is the missing link for many of our neurodiverse students.
Thank you. And certainly with all of these wonderful technology tools, right? When you say drawing, like you say, not everybody is a perfect artist, but they can express themselves in so many ways with so many of these wonderful technology tools that we can use in the classroom at home, right? To express themselves through pictures, through diagrams, through, doodling or whatever it might be. And I think that technology can also help a lot of kids where they can, again, express and share what they are thinking and how they are thinking. And that also helps us, I think, to be able to look, into that little window, right? To see what is going on. How is the brain processing all of this information? How is it accessing this information? Which is very beneficial, of course, for parents and teachers. And again, I know in the classrooms that I visit, I'm very proud of the digital products that I work with because it helps those teachers to see into that window, gives them the children, the opportunities to express themselves and show what they have learned in different ways through differentiated instruction, right, personalized learning, but really through a lot of those technological tools that we use in literacy and math, science, especially in some of those PhET designs and simulations and all of that, so that the power of the technological tools that we have, that we can help, again, can really open up a lot of creative juices for a lot of our kids, right, and let them express just like you were talking about. So it's really, really exciting. That kind of leads us into, as we talk about access and resources, different types of resources, certainly. When we think about personalized learning, I know in my world, the products I work with and the teachers I work with and McGraw Hill, personalized learning is very, very, very important. Accessibility is very important in all of that. And we're helping our students and teachers and parents and everyone really focus on that. And then I love, Ashley, you always say actionable items, right? Like when I'm working with my teachers, it's like, okay, we have all this data, we know what's going on, what is next? How can we help them to express, everything, to show what they know in different ways? Again, kind of thinking out of the box and all of that. Does anybody want to, tap into or share some more? Again, as we think about personalized learning, with a focus on neurodiversity and accessibility, just adding some more resources.
Yeah, and I want to, before I name some resources, I love, I like panel discussions, but I like engaging with the audience. So as we're giving you all some resources, if there's any question, while we're giving resources, take a moment to reflect and see what's front of mind for you. What in this panel discussion did you really want to get answered? Or if there's an additional question that you want to pose, what's at the forefront of you thinking and processing right now? And I would love to open the floor for that. Yes. But a few resources, I mentioned Universal Design for Learning. the Learner Variability Project, which has the Learner Variability Navigator. I know we have some folks in here that might be looking for continuing education units. I am not with the IRIS Center, but the IRIS Center offers free professional development around an array of topics from TBI, traumatic brain injury. I'm not going to be one of those educators. Traumatic brain injuries, to behavioral plans, to inclusion classrooms. So they offer a lot of free professional development. And then also, if you have not read Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, please do yourself a favor and go ahead and read that. She talks about cultural responsiveness, but she also highlights the fact of like keeping that level of rigor. So sometimes as we have conversations like this, people think, okay, you scaffold and you scaffold and you scaffold. So much so that we're not giving students the tools to actually build those muscles, to critically think, to actually advocate for themselves, things of that nature. So she calls it, I believe, productive struggle. So if you haven't done so, I would definitely read or even go onto her website and read some of her blog posts.
Excellent. Any other resources we want to share? Or we did have a list of resources we could probably send it out and share with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, as far as kind of like Ashley was saying with the autistic population, if Google, you can find so many free resources to make individualized token charts for them to earn specific things. You can just use a whiteboard as well and not have to spend any money. Visual schedules are super helpful as well. And then we can get into the whole communication and all of that, which that's a separate discussion.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, come on.
Thank you. It's very interesting discussion and very recognizable for me. And I totally agree with the plea for a universal design for learning. And looking at the diversity, what I meet in the Netherlands is the struggle of teachers with how do I get this job done? Because personalization takes a lot of time. You not only need resources, but how do I get the job done? Have you any ideas on that?
No, that's and thank you for that question. That's a real question, because teachers already work long hours, have a finite amount of resources. Some ways that when I was in the classroom that I would actually support that is there would be students in my classroom that love to learn by teaching. So this is when student-led groups came into play. I would have some of my students make exemplars. And also, like, now there's a repository, like multiple repositories available where you could pull lesson plans. A lot of school districts here in America are actually creating spaces because we just came out of COVID. So a lot of teachers might have templates on Padlets and Flipgrids and all these, tools that you can just clone and copy. So that I say don't reinvent the wheel. Also within, and I will say within our micro-credentials are being digital promise, we actually ask folks to upload evidence. So, there's an array of just resources out there. And I would say don't be afraid to pull some of those lesson plans that have already been created, and then also leverage your students for student-led discussions, Socratic method, things of that nature. Like, feel free, because honestly, the fact of the matter is the teacher is not the only one who owns the classroom and the learning experience. So I think it's a need to also release some of that and say, okay, I know my student is very passionate about this particular topic. So you're gonna go ahead and lead a student-led group. I'm walking around the classroom. I'm sitting here maybe asking probing questions. I'm not standing in front of the classroom and saying, okay, this is what today's lesson is. That leans to neurotypical behavior, that leans to traditional learning styles, and so really letting them actually flourish within the classroom environment. I would say. And I know that was a lot, so lesson plans and lean on the students.
I'd like to add to that. I've listened to you this morning and was hoping to catch up with you, so I'll hook up with you later. But I have some ideas on this topic. One thing that I want to think about is the range or the diversity that exists within diversity, right? We've got students that come to school in the United States who are on feeding tubes and breathing tubes and are on a stretcher, and they have an aide that works with them all day. And it's very, very difficult for them to access high school history class, for example. If you can't talk and you can't sit up, it's really hard to be part of that fuller classroom. But then we've got other students who have been sequestered in separate classrooms who really could function, given the right tools, who really could function in a broader classroom setting. And I don't think there's one answer to this. I think you have to look at the population of students that you have. Some students really do need to be in a quieter space. I know this is not politically correct to say in the inclusion world that we're in these days. But it's true that if a person can't speak or stand or walk or participate in life very much, it's really hard for them to be in a debate class. So we wouldn't ask that of them. But the universal design for instruction is such a beautiful model for working with special need and typically developing children, because you can provide an array of activities that all the children can do, and there's something in there for each one of those children. And that kind of falls into line of the whole idea that I've been talking about, the 8 psychological processes of literacy. Because if you have a mindset as a teacher that you're going to provide activities that every single student in the classroom can access, so that might mean that one student is really great at reading and writing, and that's how they access their learning. And another student is really good at speaking and listening, and that's how they're going to access their learning. And then we've got this other kid over here who can draw and write. And so we have all of these different gifts that we are not allowing ourselves to have the diversity of our own gifts. And so we look at students who are considered special needs students, and we think of them as being the opposite of gifted. They're ungifted, and we're always giving their families, here's the Woodcock-Johnson test, and we show that your child is in the 32nd percentile of blah, 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 blah. Well, Mom and Dad already know their child isn't very smart and that the other kids are ahead of their kid. What about this child's strengths? How does this child actually learn? And this is my big thing that really bothers me about teacher training, is that we do not ever as teachers learn how other people learn. We learn how to teach, and we're not basing that teaching on how people learn. We're basing it on how we were taught to teach and how that person was taught to teach. And so it bridges back a few generations of how you're supposed to sit everybody in a line, and then everybody's supposed to sit quietly and be respectful and raise their hand. And that's not how the human being learns in the first place. Human beings learn by getting gritty and dirty and down in it and doing it. And so when we're asking neurodiverse children to sit in a row, in a line, in a class where they have to behave in a certain way, that's really hard for the neurotypical children. And then when we stick neurodiverse children into that setting, they can't do it. And then we say, well, see, they shouldn't be in the classroom. Well, no. We need to give every student in the classroom an opportunity to learn in the way that they learn. So that means that I have to give my class the universal design for instruction of allowing the students to access the materials in a variety of different ways using all 8 psychological processes of literacy so that everybody gets something. So maybe I can do all 8 of those, but maybe drawing is my strength. Maybe I can only do one of those 8 and drawing is my strength. But, okay. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I know.
I think you get my point.
It's all wonderful, but we are on a tight schedule. So thank you so much for valuing these differences and celebrating all of our wonderful children and students. And thank you again for being with us this afternoon.